everyone. Welcome back to another great episode of The Human Role. Thanks so much for joining this episode, listening in. Thanks for all your likes, comments, subscriptions. So far, it's been such a great journey. But as mentioned previously, we have another great guest on. This episode, we're going to talk about how to successfully implement your HCM system. So anyone who is thinking about going through that transition or already in the process, as we, of course, approach year one, there's a lot of top heavy 10 ones, January 1 go live. So we want to kind of just help you start the best foundation, I guess we would say, for that process. And so joining me today is Leah Joyner. She is the founder and CEO of HCM Tech Advisory. Welcome, Leah. We are excited to have you today.
Hello.
And so Leah comes with a lot of experience when it comes to system implementations, right? She has heavy benefits experience as well. So really wanted to have her on and allow her to kind of give her background and experience, but also give her input on this very important topic. Because as we all know, whether you've been through an implementation or not been through an implementation before, if you don't check all the boxes off in the beginning, and kind of just get into a situation where you don't know what you don't know, that could be a domino effect in the future. Why? So we want to try to help prevent that as much as possible. So Leah, for anyone in my network who may not have come across your page before, any of your webinars that you do, Leah has really great webinars and HR roundtables. Just go ahead and give us maybe some background on your experience and what led you to starting your own advisory company.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Tiana. I'm really excited, especially to be talking about this topic because this is exactly what I do. So I'm Leah Joyner. My background is in actuarial science, mathematics. I started right out of college doing pension valuations, and then I moved over to health and welfare plans. So doing designing, claims analysis, helping clients with budgeting and preparing for their benefits for the following year, forecasting, etc. Loved doing that. And then I started having kids, so I needed to not travel as much. So an opportunity came up where I got a job at a company called Aon Hewitt at the time. It's evolved since, but that's where my benefits administration knowledge started, my love of systems. So I worked there for a few years, and then I started working for a company called LifeWorks. And the name of the system is LifeWorks. And that's where I really got my hands dirty with configuration and configuring systems from scratch for very large clients, over 100,000 lives on benefits, health and welfare plans. So that is my background. The reason why I started my company while I was at LifeWorks, which the name of the company now is called TELUS Health, I realized that clients and employers needed an advocate in this space to really guide them on why they're buying a system, why do they need certain features, what really works, understanding the lingo, someone who can explain things between the application development teams, the IT teams, etc. So I knew that I wanted to do this, be that client advocate and a consultant in the HCM space. I just didn't know how I was going to do it on my own. But everything happens for a reason. When one door closes, another opens. So I was laid off in 2022, late 2022. And I actually had time then to kind of think about, what do I want to do? It was a blessing because I've never really had time to think about my career and my next steps. And that was the time. And that's when I said, you know what? This is the time for me to do what I've always wanted to do, which is start my own business. So HCM Tech Advisory is a company that helps clients purchase systems. I just want an HR leader to be able to sleep at night, essentially. So we bring peace of mind and we help employers know that they're making the right decision. So we're that advocate when it comes to purchasing or selecting a system. And we don't just select, we also do optimization. So many times if something is wrong with the system, is not because they need a new system. That's not going to solve anything. Getting new systems is a lot of work. So you kind of, we come in to really understand the full picture. And then from there, we can determine, okay, do we need to optimize the existing solution? Is it a training thing? Or has the client really outgrown the system? And then at that point, we can go for a new one.
Optimize your business with a Workforce AI Edge powered by Visier. Make smarter decisions and achieve better outcomes with real-time AI insights delivered to every people leader. Explore more at visier.com.
Absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. I would say that is definitely critical, and keynotes I will definitely talk about too throughout this episode is that sometimes it's not the system. I know that's not what everyone out there wants to hear, but sometimes a little more training can go a long way. So thank you so much, Leah. And look, what a great story, right? Everything happens for a reason, right? Obviously, and sometimes we don't understand what that specific reason is, but just a little patience goes a long way. So I'm glad to see that you're here today. I'm glad we, got connected. We share definitely similar journeys, but we'll save that for a later date. But let's get into the nitty gritty now of the topic, because I wanted to definitely get your insight on what you would really consider like key considerations when it comes to selecting an HCM system. There's definitely a lot of pre-work that needs to be done. I wouldn't say, in my opinion, you can say yay or nay to that, but in my opinion, you don't want to just like go to the first system or the first salesperson or just listen to one person in the business. So I'd really be open to hear like what you would consider as some really, key factors.
So the first thing and the most simplest way when you're trying to find or look for an HCM, whatever the solution is, it could be just an applicant tracking or a full HRIS. You want to write, why are you doing this? What is not working? Write down the requirements. What is working or not working? What is it that you wish that you had that you don't have? What are your goals? Because when you start like that, before you even see a system, you already know what your requirements are, right? You don't want to go into a demo situation and start basing your decisions off of that. So write down what you want. And this helps later on when you start looking at demos. And also when you start looking at what are your success measures? Because that is another thing that you want in this process. Once you go through implementation to know, did you accomplish your goals in the beginning? So write down your requirements. Then you kind of want to know what the budget is. Systems are so different, right? There's so many of them out there. So make sure you have your budget in place. And then the team, that's another thing that I think clients miss is, okay, you purchased a system, but did you think about the team that's going to implement this? Because implementation is huge. You need your functional teams and people who understand the work. So the payroll team, HR team, obviously, all of the teams that are using IT teams are going to be needed. Data team, who's going to be providing all of the data to all of the resources on the team or the vendor. So your team is key to think about when you're thinking about a system implementation. And then the cost of that, because if you're implementing a system like Workday, for example, you're going to need people who are experts at configuring these systems. And if you don't have that in-house, that's an additional cost. Are you going to have that in-house and hire that? Or will you hire consultants? Very expensive. So these are the things. And as you're thinking about costs, it'll help you also to understand the kind of system that you need and you can sustain internally. I usually advise my clients, if you have a team, then these are the systems that you can get. If you don't have a team, you may need to start hiring people, or consultants are going to be your best friend. And that's an additional cost every year. And then once you know that, then you start with the demos. So you want to definitely look at the systems and ask questions during these demos. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what the demos are there for. The other thing that is key in this process is to include the end user. So who are these main end users that will need to use this system? If you start looking at systems, start looking at demos and bring that in without having consulted the teams, there is a pretty high probability that you may not have change champions who you're going to need. They're going to be your best friends, and they're not going to want to adapt to this new system. So very important and key.
Yes, all good things. You nailed it. Let's just, I will say too, so many times I've seen where like in the boardroom or with executive meetings where maybe your payroll supervisor, manager, like benefits admin isn't included and these decisions are made and it literally does not check half of the boxes that they need, right? And so then that does cause like some internal turmoil, right? And so I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it on my side too, where when we come in as consultants to help clean things up, people don't even want to work with us because they're upset already. And it's not really about us. It's just about they don't feel like they were included in that decision. But I do want to say too, so a lot of points that you talked about, I want to also mention, not every system is perfect. I mean, we have plenty of years of experience across multiple systems, right? So even when you're gathering the needs of all the teams from recruiting to, your HR team, IT, finance, there may be something you might have to just compromise with, just like everything. And so I know sometimes we're going to spend all this money. We need to have everything covered. But sometimes there might be one or two things that may not be fully covered, but I would say if you're getting 80, 90% covered, right? And that's at least helping people day to day, that's pretty good when you're focusing on implementing, a new HRIS system or just a new one-off system, depending on the department. But just all my HR payroll people out there, sometimes you're not going to get everything, sometimes it's something that you specifically want, but is that necessarily beneficial or needed for the company at that moment, right? Is that just like a nice to have that you want that could hold off for a little bit versus like immediate urgent issues? I think that's something that people also have to evaluate. Agree or not agree?
I love that you said that, because you see a lot of tensions during implementation. So this is a part of change management as well, what we're talking about. Explaining to the team, first of all, you're getting a new system because something is wrong. So you get a new system. Just know offhand, the process is going to change. You won't be able to do the same things you're doing today in this new system the exact same way. So the processes will change. So that is one thing to keep in mind, is if you're expecting that you're going to continue doing what you've always been doing in this other system, in this new system, you're just going to fail. It's going to be a disaster. Explaining that during the change management process, which starts all the way before all of this even starts. And also letting the teams know, the functional teams, that, what you just said, some things, this tool may not, it's not that they may not have it. They may not do it exactly the way you're doing it today. And that happens literally in every system. I don't know how you can move from one system to the other and everything stays the same. Then that means, then why did you move? Right.
Yeah, it's is it wrong? I mean, sometimes it may not be wrong, right? It might just be different from what you're used to. And that's where the compromise piece comes from, all in team effort. But so, hey, look, let's say we got all buy-in, everyone's happy, we've selected the systems. What would you say would be your walkthrough, typical steps of an HCM system implementation?
So I would say the first thing is, and hopefully you are doing this also as you're looking, you want an outside consultant. I would recommend having somebody who has gone through a full implementation cycle guiding this process. Because if you haven't, there are things that you may not see, right? And those are the things that cause chaos at the end. In your budgeting, I would recommend, and I know this is what I do for a living, this is not why I'm saying this, is just even when I was, I had a stint as an HR leader for a year, and I was going through Workday implementation. And I had, even though I had gone through a full implementation process, as an internal person, you start thinking about things differently because you have there's just so many priorities for you to really focus on a system implementation and do the right thing always. So I would recommend just somebody removed from the process, kind of doing the oversight. So that's the first thing. Then you want to create a communication process. How are you going to communicate with the team that is involved, the team that's doing the implementation, your functional teams, your vendors? How will you bring up escalations when inevitably there's going to be an issue? If you have an implementation and there's no issue, wow, I've never heard of that. So you want to have an escalation process. You kind of want a process on how is the project going to be managed? What tools are going to be used? How are notes going to be distributed and communicated? You want to start having the timelines. These are what gives people anxiety, is the timelines. Like all of a sudden your calendar is like taken over during an implementation. With implementation, and then you have your day-to-day. It's tough, right? But, with all the implementations I've ever been through, having those meetings on the calendar every week, that, you have 5 hours of meetings for this implementation and you're prepared and it goes smoothly instead of not knowing and then you're asked to jump on calls last minute. So scheduling those are key. And then steering committee, you want to have those meetings with the steering committee, which is your leadership. At least monthly, I would say at least. That's probably even maybe every 3 weeks. The steering committee helps with bottlenecks, escalations, just ensuring everything is going smoothly. So that's your communication process. And then stakeholders, we talked about the functional teams. Who from payroll needs to be in these meetings? Who from the HR team? Who from IT? All your functional teams. And I would say, avoid just bringing like the leader of those teams to the implementation because they don't know the requirements. They're not the day-to-day people. You want the day-to-day person in these meetings who can quickly provide the requirements. These are the requirements meetings. You don't want to create bottlenecks by just bringing the leader of those teams. So those are your functional teams. You need IT. One of the other things that I always bring up very early in an implementation process is the data. Data you have to discuss immediately. How will the data get there? How will it go to the vendor? Because you need your data transferred to the new system. And what is that process going to look like? Because what happens a lot of times with data, the way it is today, you may need to extract it in a completely different way. And it's going to work very completely differently in the new system. So you want the data team to start working now. They may need to start building new queries. They need extra time for that because, they have their day-to-day jobs. They're already working 40 hours a week. So this is another completely different project that will take a lot of their time. So they need a lot of time for prep. So data is key, preparing how the data will be transferred over. And then reviewing vendor timelines. So the vendor will give you their timeline, but make sure you review it as the purchaser of the tool. Does it align with your organization calendar, whatever is happening, open enrollment timelines, compensation pay increases, timelines? Is it inclusive? One of the things that an outside consultant will do is they've done this before. So they know what they're looking for. The other thing, training is key. And it's one thing to bring up in the beginning of an implementation because you have to start training initially, it sounds kind of backwards, but by the time you go live, you really want to know this system. So if you haven't started taking these small training sessions during the implementation, you're going to struggle in the end. So training is key also to be included. So these are the reasons why we review the timeline for the vendor to make sure it's inclusive. It includes your third-party providers, for example, for benefits, ACA providers, COBRA providers, all of these people, as you're going through an implementation, will need all these vendors. They'll need to be notified and also included in this process. And then the last thing I would say is testing. During an implementation, one of the things that go wrong, when we start reviewing later what happened is that testing wasn't done thoroughly, or sometimes it just wasn't done. Highly recommend you test. And I've had clients say, oh, you tested it, so we can push to prod. I don't belong in your organization. I'm here as a consultant. And of course, I am for your benefit as the client. I'm going to do everything I can, but I'm human. Clients get very happy that a vendor is going to pull their data for them. Great, but you got to look at that data. You got to test it because they're only human. So testing is key.
Yeah, perfect. So there were a couple of key things that I want to, I'm going to use a training for the next question that I wanted to pick your brain on. But first, I know, Leah had mentioned bringing in an outside consultant, right? So when you're doing so, I also want to encourage everyone to look at their tenure internally. A lot of times when you have someone that has been in the seat for like 20 years, they are so used to doing things their specific way. And this is no punishment against them. It's just that the world evolves. So if they have not themselves evolved and have been stuck in one specific process, bringing in an outside person that does this, rinse and repeat to multiple people, can bring you even more insight. So maybe you've done it this way, one specific way, and you're going to go to this system and do it this one other way. But maybe there's like one or two other ways that you just have no clue about, right? So having an outsider's experience and opinion be brought into your company is always really, really helpful. So I really want to encourage everyone, like when you're going through this evaluation process, that's really critical to start doing some outreach, getting some opinions, looking at your team as a whole. Look, as a consultant, we're there to do the specific project, but not necessarily to take over people's job. That's why we're consulting, right? So
temporarily.
Exactly. So it's just one of those things where we're coming in to provide you the expertise. And, if you want to use this from an advisory stance longer term, that's one thing. But for that specific project, that's what we're really there for. So I just want to get that intimidation factor away from everyone. And then, of course, the actual testing too, getting people in that are doing things day to day will really help answer the questions when it comes to departments, locations, the general ledger, right? So a lot of times some systems can only accommodate a certain amount of departments, a certain amount of, classifications or cost centers. So like delving in, deeper than what Leah was mentioning is like really, this is why we're saying it's so critical. Because it's just one of those things where if that is missed because there's someone that has been in those meetings that is not involved in the day-to-day, you've already signed a contract, which is costly. And to get out of those contracts is almost unheard of. And then once you start implementing that, right, that's when it really becomes a much bigger issue, because if it can't accommodate all of your specific needs, then you wind up in a pickle. And then the testing will also catch that too. So when you're comparing, the prior payrolls to the current payrolls, that's what really lets you know if something is missing. And that goes back to the data that Leah was talking about. So please, please, please take all feedback here, rewatch this episode and get her insight over and over and over, because it is very, very critical. But then here we are to training. So I really wanted to get into the next steps on what strategies that you recommend for any of these changes, but also specifically user adoption. So when you mentioned how some people will try to reject or be upset or not want to use the system, what are your strategies that you've used to kind of overcome that?
Yeah. So user adoption is a whole process. It really starts with change management. And I love the Jason Averbook, if you know that name. I know that you know Jason. He says change enablement, which I love, because I feel like change management it's just become just a word now. And, I don't know if it's positive or not, but change enablement, what that means is you're enabling change. Essentially, something major is happening and we need to make sure that we prepare our population for it, right? A system implementation is huge. It affects everybody in the organization. And so you're changing everybody, not just the users, the end users, employees as well. So, I'll give you examples. When I was implementing Workday, I worked with a consultant. We hired a consultant with Workday to implement that system, and they helped us. We worked with them also for change management. And one of the things that we did from the beginning was start communicating. So we created a newsletter to the implementation team that we had kind of come up with, which involved all the functional teams, data team, huge team. But I was sending this newsletter to the team, I think on a weekly basis, maybe a bi-weekly basis, to tell them what is happening, what's upcoming, what are we doing, what are the benefits of this new system. Same thing, sending the same newsletter, not just to the small team, the functional team, sending a similar with, certain details out, because the rest of the population, the employee population, is not going to need to know certain details. So you're doing the same thing to the population. These are the employees who we're going to release this system to. Similar goes to the end users, location managers, et cetera, who will be using it a little bit more than the regular employee. And you're giving information of what is the benefit? What are you going to get? How do you use this system? What is changing? You start this from the beginning. Something's coming, something like that. New change is coming. And then, the next one will be, this is the change. And then you're just explaining as you're going, and it just becomes more fun. Employees are excited. Everybody is excited to understand what's going on. They feel a part of it, and they feel like they know, like, oh, this is where we're getting this system. It's going to help with these processes. Everything is going to be efficient. They get excited. So that's one way. I think that is key. Communication, key. Make it fun. The other thing is training. So you want to train the team. Who is it? There's several people. There's the functional teams, right? They're going to have specific trainings. So payroll is going to need a specific training. Time and attendance will need specific training. Benefits team will need specific. So you want to kind of know each team, what are the trainings that they're going to need. You also want training for the end user. And then employees, the training for employees is not that detailed, but you're going to need a way to kind of let them know about the system. So who and then how. Is it going to be on demand? So functional teams, sometimes the training, a lot of times it's on demand. There can be classroom training, train the trainer. That's the way training goes, essentially. Access. So you know who you're training, how. How is this going to be accessed? Is it through quick user guides? We did that when we were implementing Workday. Those comes handy, even for employees. Employees will have their own specific guides. Okay, when you go in, this is how you do payroll, or this is how you check your pay stub, for example. And that can be a part of your change management, that newsletter that you're sending, that can be a part of the employee training. So the access also is key.
Yes, I love the newsletter. And then what you mentioned, just they feel a part of it, right? Like the first thing that came to my mind when you said that was they don't feel left in the dark. And so many times I've heard it, I'm sure you've heard it, where it's literally, they didn't even know what's coming. Like no one communicated anything. Next thing, they have this new system. No one knows where to go to clock in, to check their pay stubs. And it's this whole uproar, right? So it's like a lot of times, sometimes companies are a little bit scared at the executive level to share. I would say if you can, definitely overshare, right? There might be some things that you can't confidentially share, right? Or that they may not need to know. But I think the more and more you include people as much as you possibly can, that at least preps them, so that it's not such a shocker. That was definitely a big game changer. So you guys, that newsletter, perfect idea. Anyone going through it as we approach year end for like a January 1 go live, definitely take that as, I'm going to ping that, definitely take that as a takeaway, because that's really, really important. And then it gets people geared up, gets people excited, and then maybe they would be more in tune to wanting to try this new system, right? To see what it's about versus like being upset and then never wanting to try it. So
just to add to what you just said about not sharing everything, that's why you send the different newsletters to the different groups, because you don't want your employees learning about what's happening if there's an issue or something that can't be shared organizationally. So I would say, make sure you have like segmented your groups and how you'll distribute the newsletter.
All good things. So look, we've gone through the beginning process. We've gotten through the implementation stage. The communication has been great and wonderful. There's been no hiccups. There's always some hiccups, guys, but for the most part, at least hiccups. But now we're post go live. So what would you say would be steps that should be taken to ensure the success of the system so that it doesn't all go to waste right after it's been fully launched?
Once you go live doesn't mean you've ended. Going live just means you just started. You're live, it just started. A lot of companies will go live and end it there, and that's where mistakes happen. You want to measure your ROI. You want to make sure that your goals in the beginning of this process, you're going to meet them. Are you meeting them? So I see clients, I love when we've done like surveys with clients and they survey employees, and employees are actually, and end users will say what's going well, what's not going well. That's a great opportunity for you to quickly fix whatever the issue is. There's always going to be something that you need to fix after go live. And the only way to know is through surveying your employees. I highly recommend doing that. And then you want to make sure you optimize. So review the system went live, interview the stakeholders, the functional teams. Are they using it? Is there anything that could work better? And then reassess and fix that. So going live, it's great, but it doesn't mean it stops there. It's a system. It's always evolving, and you want to make sure you optimize it. And so you want to review it and make sure that it's working.
Once you're live, it's like, that's real life then, right? And there's typically no going back to your old system. So you got to take what you get there. But okay, so I know we're close to closing out, but I wanted to get your insight on any type of like trends, emerging trends, any other additional advice you would give anyone who is thinking or going through the implementation process currently. But then also too, any like future trends that you see kind of helping evolve in the HCM implementation space.
So AI is what everybody's talking about. And I know like people are just tired of hearing about AI, but it's so cool to see, we're in the HR space and seeing HR teams using AI and teaching their employees about artificial intelligence. I think it's key for HR teams to stay in the forefront of this, because if they don't, then they're not going to be that strategy piece of an organization, or they won't be considered the strategic piece of an organization. So to see HR teams using AI, I think is great. Obviously, there's a lot of systems out there that have integrated artificial intelligence. We say that AI has always been there for us in this world, right? But it's gotten much more improved than it ever was before. So applicant tracking systems using, I'll say Greenhouse because I love that system. I try not to mention systems, but Greenhouse is definitely on the forefront of artificial intelligence. And I love how they're all about equity, and huge thing that they're implementing is hiding the names so that systems are not using names to not hire people based on their names, because you can kind of, I guess, assume who the person is. So they're eliminating the need. You could just review a resume just based on qualities and nothing else. So things like that. I'm really excited to go to HR Tech. Last year, it was all about AI, artificial intelligence. But this year, I'm excited to see like how far have we come when it comes to systems like Greenhouse, and what are we doing based on AI since the last year.
Yeah, no, I feel that's just perfect. And also what's funny to me, so you mentioned Jason Averbook, which we both know. If anyone out there has not started following him and know of him, please go check out his LinkedIn page. He has so much great insight when it comes to AI, specifically in the HR space. But he was the first one a couple of months ago, I want to say, that I heard him mention on a webinar, what happens when AI is now a part of the org chart? And I had never thought of that. So I was like, okay, this is like coming. And so as I have said in so many past episodes, and even in my past AI episodes, I think there's been 2 now, for everyone out there, if you didn't listen to those, like, we've got to just start to accept it because it is here, and now just start utilizing it as a tool, right? It's just another added tool. I would not suggest disregarding it, right? Because then you're holding yourself back, right? You're holding your own growth back, because this is now being implemented in so many different systems. And exactly what Leah was mentioning. I mean, it's great, right? Like, there is a lot of discrimination going on. And sometimes, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional. Like, if the bias, sometimes it's just like bias that we may or may not know that we have, So yes. It's like just natural to look at a name and maybe, go against it. So it's like one of those, and I know people personally that have had to use like their middle name. So they'll apply with their real name and not get jobs. And then they'll change it and use their middle name, and then they'll get an interview, right? That's a real life thing that has happened. So,
yeah. And so that's what Greenhouse is doing, specifically what you just said, eliminating those biases. That was the word.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. This is a great conversation. Thanks so much for being with us today, Leah. Really appreciate all your insight and your wealth of knowledge and experience in the system implementation space. I know this is just going to work wonders for everyone. We are now in year end. Go lives are happening. Implementations are happening. So please rewatch this. Take all the nuggets away from it as you see fit. I definitely will try to coordinate another episode in the future. Maybe we do one come like January after all the go lives madness and get some more insight from you. But thanks so much for being on, Leah. Really appreciate having you here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And so, okay, everyone, we'll have in another 2 weeks, another good episode. We'll be talking about HR transformation. So very similar to what we talked about here with the implementation. We're going to talk about how HR is even more evolving than before. So, alrighty, thanks so much for joining. Bye.
Bye.